The U.S. economy slowed down over the first 3 months of the year, the first time it has contracted since the pandemic brought it to a screeching halt.
The fear of recession is mounting in the United States.
The whiplash continues on Wall Street. Stock futures are down across the board for all major indexes.
The market is pricing in what he would call a shallow recession. It is pricing in a downturn.
If you see this number coming out on Wednesday, if it's above 8, you've got a real problem coming into the election, because we've got a month dropping off this index that is a very, very high number.
8.8% was the expectation, which, by the way, was higher than the top line number last month. So we were already expecting an acceleration. This came in even hotter than that. It was eye-popping, to say the least.
So by looking at these 12-month numbers, we're really hiding how big the increase in prices are that are affecting ordinary Americans by a very large amount.
I think this is going to be a huge unveiling of what companies' plans are going to be to deal with recessionary expectations.
Wages have not kept up with inflation.
Hearing people say employment's still good. Well, yeah, it's a lagging indicator. It's going to take several more months before we begin to see the impact of what the Fed has done on employment. So there's a long road ahead.
It looks like we're heading into a housing recession.
13% of builders said they were dropping prices not just to get more buyers in, but to slow rising cancellations.
Nearly 12 major economies are staring at a recession. This includes the likes of United States, United Kingdom, Japan, South Korea, Australia, Canada, and the Eurozone.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to our broadcast, Planning for the Possible, keeping your events thriving during a recession. I'm Steve Boyce with B-Dance. I'll be your host for today's broadcast. We're so excited to have you joining us today. Thank you for taking your valuable time to be with us here on the broadcast. And boy, that was a bit of a bracing cold open. In a moment, we're going to be talking about some of those topics in terms of the current economic situation facing the United States, as well as the broader globe. Lots of activities going on around the world. So we're going to catch you up on the economics front, and then we're going to get into how you can prepare to respond to some of these economic challenges to make sure your events are thriving and growing, and that you continue to reach your business objectives and help all of your stakeholders achieve their business objectives as well. We've got a great program lined up for you folks. Just an all-star panel and lineup of featured speakers. I'll be bringing them on throughout today's program, and we'll be introducing our first speaker in just a moment. But before we do, just want to let folks know that here at B-Dance, we love to have your interaction and engagement on the broadcast. And if you haven't already seen, just to your left here in your viewing console, we have put a group text chat area. I can see many of you are already taking advantage of it. Look at that thing shake. Thank you, production team, for highlighting that for us. Now, folks, will be looking at the group text chat throughout today's program. Feel free to type questions that you have in that area, or most importantly, share your perspectives with others in the audience and also our featured speakers. We want to make you part of this shared experience and a co-created one. So we appreciate your interaction throughout the program. Jiggle, jiggle, Gary. Absolutely. Great to see you, Gary Bell, and Doug McLean and others. Welcome to our broadcast. We got folks dialing in from across the world. We appreciate you sharing your locations, and we hope that you continue to engage actively. Just in case folks haven't yet taken advantage of the group chat, I've got a question for you. Actually came from one of our featured speakers, Dan Lotsoff. More from him in a moment. We'd love to hear from you folks. What's your favorite swag giveaway that you found in an event? We've all been to many, many events, right? Love to hear in the chat. What's that favorite swag giveaway that you brought home from an event at any point in time during your career? Folks are always looking for new creative things to give out at their exhibit booth. So we'd love to see some things in the chat from you folks. If you've gotten some creative swag, let's see what we got. Emma King's in the UK, $10 a gallon for gas. Emma, are those euros? Is that British pounds? I don't want to be spending time doing foreign exchange here on the broadcast. But folks, we'll look forward to your participation throughout the program. Now, we want to go ahead and get started. We've got a packed show and a packed lineup. We're going to have to move quickly through all of this great content and our incredible lineup of speakers. So thank you again, folks, for joining us on the broadcast here today, Planning for the Possible. I want to go ahead and introduce our first speaker. And this gentleman is going to really help us set the stage for today's discussion. I'm so super excited to have on the program John Koch, who is Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of the Federal Savings Bank. John has led the bank since April of 2011. Mr. Koch attended Indiana University on a full United States congressional scholarship and graduated with a bachelor's in finance. He then was appointed as a second lieutenant and served as an armor platoon leader in the United States Army. Thank you for your service. Until being recruited to join GE Capital, where he completed the company's famed 2-year management program. We all remember that great program. Mr. Koch was then quickly promoted and spent 7 years in operations, marketing, and various senior financial and executive positions before leaving in 1999 to join Chicago Bank Corp as a partner and eventually held the title of president. He's now, of course, the chairman and CEO of the Federal Savings Bank. John is the father of 6 children and is very active in his local community on the North Shore of Chicago. Folks, please put your hands together and welcome to the program, John Koch. John, it's great to see you. Thanks so much for being with us on the broadcast. How are you doing today on Tuesday?
I'm doing okay, but I'm a fun guy. Why am I the guy who has to lead with all the tough news following those news clips? That's just not fair today.
I know, that was a bit of a setup for you. John, you're here to help us make economics fun, right? So I'm sure a lot of folks went through, economics classes in high school and college and so forth. Maybe some of the folks in our audience haven't had much background in economics. So thank you for joining us today to help us sort through some of this. Now, before we get to some of the really pressing questions about what's going on in the economics world, John, share with our audience just a little bit about yourself, the role you play at the Federal Savings Bank, and other tidbits you'd like to share.
Absolutely. I appreciate that opportunity because we do have kind of a unique niche. I'm the, as you said, the chairman and the CEO, but also the owner of the Federal Savings Bank. Federal Savings Bank is the same charter as a big giant Wells Fargo or Bank of America, the same business, but like any community bank, we're very focused on a niche. And our niche is home lending, which I think is probably relevant in some of the times that we're looking at right now. Over the last 2.5 years, we've closed just under $30 billion in home lending transactions. So we're a little bit mighty. We're actually the most profitable bank in the United States of our size, which is something we're proud to an extent because profit obviously matters, but it's really doing our mission, which we like to call it, helping our customers find a place called home. And we focus on that. So we're very, very involved in the community, trying to fulfill our mission on a day-to-day basis. Uniquely, we're veteran owned and operated. So we're actually one of the largest veterans VA loan lenders in the country. We're actually top 5, which being the founder of the business scares me when I get listed with names like Wells Fargo and Freedom and some of these giant names. It's just little old us, but we have a couple thousand team members that we work with today and just trying to fulfill our mission on a day-to-day basis.
Fantastic, John. It's great to be small and mighty, right? We embrace that mantra here at BDance as well. And thank you again for taking your valuable time, John, to join us here. Now, John, as you saw in our cold open, which is about a week behind, and we're going to update some of the data and statistics that we showed in that, but boy, things are looking kind of gloomy. And I know our audience is nervous. We've got an audience of event professionals, marketing and communications professionals, folks who are looking ahead as they plan their programs to engage their communities and key stakeholders. And I think a lot of questions on folks' minds about how the economy might impact those programs. John, before we get into this conversation, I thought we'd give our audience an opportunity to share some of their perspectives with us. I believe we have a polling question to share with the audience. And folks, we would love for you to take advantage of this if we can get that polling question popped up on the screen. And as you can see, folks, which statement best reflects your assessment of the current and near-term U.S. economic situation? See your choices there. U.S. is currently in a recession. U.S. will enter a recession sometime in 2022. Third option, the U.S. will enter a recession in 23. And your fourth choice, the U.S. will not enter a recession in 22 or 23. And of course, you always have the option, I don't know, or do not have an opinion. So we're going to give folks just a few seconds here to answer that question. John, it's a very kind of a difficult, nervous time for people, and we're going to be getting into defining recession in terms like inflation and interest rates and so forth. But maybe while we're waiting for the poll results to come up, John, and we'll share those in a second, are things nervous around your shop at the Federal Savings Bank? How are you folks looking at the markets, and are Are your clients and customers starting to get nervous about some of the information they're seeing?
Yeah, well, it certainly is. I think one of the advantages that I have being on your panel today is I'm not a pure economist. I actually run a business, and we live and work in about 45 different communities around the country. Being a federally chartered bank, we can lend in every state in the nation and the territories. So we kind of have a broad swath of what's going on. And yeah, absolutely, we've seen the pullback in the last 90 days. You know, we went through an amazing opportunity in the home lending business, and during the recession, we were one of the companies or industries that was insulated, right? We took, as interest rates dropped, we took the opportunity to help out, tens of thousands of customers to lower their interest rates, which was fantastic. But we're not immune to the same worries that are happening with your guests today. In fact, I mentioned that we have just under 2,000 or so employees. We've already this year had to lay off about 500 people in our business. And being a family-owned company, you can imagine that the sleepless nights that creates when you know each one of these people individually, especially when you grow a business from scratch from day one with the first 5 people. And so we're not immune to this. It's permeating that sort of underpinning fear or anxiousness throughout the entire industry, my industry.
Well, that's never great to hear, right? When folks lose work opportunities and so forth. But I think it demonstrates that the impacts can be pretty far-reaching. Now, if we can get that poll results back up, I'd love to just have you comment, John. It's kind of a mixed set of responses here. We got about 35% of folks in the audience who think we're currently in a recession. 30% believe we'll enter sometime later this year, 20% next year. God bless you, the 5% of folks who think we'll avoid a recession over the next year and a half. And there's some folks who aren't quite sure, right? Maybe they're here to learn a little bit about what you think, John. So let's get into this now. We're hearing a lot about inflation, and we're hearing a lot about interest rates. We're hearing about recession and the possibility of dropping into a recession. Just a quick note, last week we had some updates to some of the numbers that we shared. On Wednesday of last week, the Federal Reserve Bank raised its core Fed funds rate by 75 basis points, right? So 0.75%. It's a pretty big hike for the Fed, given recent history. And we also on Thursday got the advanced look at the second quarter GDP numbers, which I believe came in worse than expected. The consensus, I think, was to have about a 0.3% positive growth. The first estimate came in at 0.9% negative, right? And on the heels of 1.6% drop in Q1, that's 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth. So, John, kind of where are we? What does all this mean? Are we technically in a recession with 2 quarters of negative GDP? What's your assessment of that?
Right. Well, my particular technique, Steve, is I learned it in my years at GE, which was keep it simple, stupid, and try to concatenate the most complicated subjects down to simple things. And the short answer to the question is no one's quite sure. And it seems like what's really interesting to me is how this sort of raucous environment that we all live in these days, whether it's politics or social media, whatever it is, it's now moved its way into financial data. And in fairness, the true definition of a recession, we are in a recession. It's 2 quarters of negative growth in our gross domestic product, which is the accumulation of all our work and all of our efforts to keep it simple in the United States. That's just a simple fact. It's true. I think both sides of the political aisle are always, tempted to use things to their advantage. But I'd be fibbing if I've never quite run into the brazenness of trying to switch numbers around to make your story work. We are in a recession. The situation is this. It's complicated because they're comparing numbers to previous quarters and previous activity in an unprecedented time, right? Obviously, COVID was one of the biggest things that ever happened to us in our work career. It's reminiscent of the pain we went through in 2007, 2008, and 2009 in our careers. It's just upside down. So the bottom line in my experience is this. Whether you're in technically a recession or not, it's important. But so what's really is important is these words translate into emotion and actions that have lingering effects on individuals, like all of us on the call right now. The fact that we're even talking about this, it just lingers. And what happens is our government tries to do the best they can. I really do believe generally that the Fed wants to do a good job, but they try to do things with statistics and mathematics and models, and they look at the past to interpret the future. But what they can never get their arms around is the passion and the fears, the anxieties that reside in the American public. And getting that timing right, that's what always sends us off the cliff. And that's really what your conference is about today, I think, is to try to figure out where are those passions, what are those anxieties, how can we wrestle those things down and continue to have really successful events.
Oh, that's great, John. And thank you so much for bringing the focus on what really matters, right? Because I think ultimately you're exactly right. What we want to try to provide our audience today are some practical tips and insights for, okay, the economy might be having some challenges. Let's leave the statistics to the experts and so forth. But what do I have to do as a small business owner, right? John, you built the business from the ground up, and we're going to have other guests who've also been entrepreneurs, and we'll have similar, I think, perspectives to share. And sort of, how can we be actionable? What do we have to plan for? How do we take steps today to try and shore up our businesses and thrive even during tough economic times? We'd be remiss, though, John, if we didn't at least touch on, from kind of an academic perspective, this notion of inflation, because it seems to be a big driver of our current economic woes. I believe, folks, we love the video treat. So I think we got another clip here that attempts to explain inflation at kind of a very basic level. So if we can roll that clip, and then, John, I'll get your thoughts on that in a second.
And I want to actually do just like a little bit of walking through how you should think about inflation so that people understand why. If you start in a car at 0 and you accelerate, 10 miles per hour per month, then after 6 months, you're going 60 miles per hour. After 12 months, you're going 120 miles per hour. And so what you care about is like, what's my velocity right now? And so by looking at these 12-month numbers, we're really, really hiding how big the increase in prices are that are affecting ordinary Americans by a very large amount.
It's really interesting, John. So, we saw the latest inflation number that we had in the cold open came in at 9.1%. That's a 12-month rolling average, right? So I think what the gentleman was saying is each month that we get new inflation statistics, the 12th month drops off, right? And we add a new month. And I think what he was saying is that the month that's going to drop off was a low recession or a low inflation number. And now we're adding higher inflation numbers as we proceed. So Is that right? And how should folks think about inflation? I mean, is this just going to rage on forever, or are there steps being taken by the Fed or the federal government to try to staunch the rise in prices? Thoughts on that?
Right. Well, you're absolutely right. This is the number that really matters to everybody who's a normal person working, right, and living every day. It's funny, out of nowhere, I'm 54 years old, which I can hardly believe it. But I think back to the last time that there was really inflation in this country that was meaningful, when I was a little boy and into my high school and college years in the 70s and then the 1980s, early 1990s. And it's funny because those inflation is so creates such stigma, such long memories inside of you. I think I probably made business decisions waiting for the next spike of inflation for the entire 25 years I've been running my company. In hindsight, that was a complete mistake. We never had inflation. We made decisions all the time that were incorrect. We're always fighting the last war. But you think about that long memory of the pain of inflation and how long it sticks with the consumer. That's the biggest threat that we have, is people are living that right now. But what I say, I think it's a little bit, Steve, some of my military experience. I have a lot of children. I have 6 children. And I remember seeing I have 3 boys and 3 girls. And interestingly, my girls are the tough ones. But I remember one of my middle sons falling down on the mountain, and he's moaning and rolling around, and looking at him saying, Max, what are you going to do? Are you going to just stay here and flounder and die, or you're going to get up? Let's go. It's a little bit of this tough love kind of military thing, but he figures out how to get his way up, right? And he moves down the hill and he moves on. And it's a lesson that I know he'll tell his own kids about how mean his dad was to him, right? But you think about our own situation. What are we going to do as business owners today? We do the same thing that we do every day. When these situations arise, in my experience, it creates an amazing opportunity. And in the industry of the folks that are on here today, they're going to be looking for people that are trying to run events, trying to find opportunities, et cetera, to again take advantage of the opportunities that'll develop through this crisis as others do it. We know as Americans, as we get up on those skis again, we say, okay, what do I have to do? I'll right size my business. I'll get my cost structure aligned. Things will slow down. Prices will ease, and we'll drive on again in the next cycle like we always do as successful entrepreneurs.
That's great. So, John, it's really a practical perspective, right? Because I think we can all get caught up in these statistics and, what we're hearing through the news media, and it's just kind of a constant influx of this, what is right now pretty negative news, right? And I think what you're recommending is, hey, focus on your business, hunker down, try not to be too overly distracted or scared by what's coming through some of these statistics and data, and really take a core look at your business like any entrepreneur would, right? How am I going to get through these struggles? So let's take a look at that. And, look, we actually had some questions here. We could come back and take a look at previous recessions, the Great Recession of 08 and 09. Some folks in our audience may remember. You and I certainly were around at the time. Does our current situation, John, feel at all like that great financial crisis of 08 or 09? Or is this recession or near recession different from that prior time?
Well, it's very different. I kind of have a cute adage I wanted to add to your previous question before I answer that. I have a good friend who used to say to me, the past is lost to you. And frankly, the future is uncertain. Really, the only thing that you can control is right this moment. Even being on this event, trying to figure out how do I find a competitive advantage? What are things looking like is a great example of that. We can only control this moment. And that's what we should do in our businesses every day. Because this recession is very different than the last recession. Unfortunately, the industry that I'm involved in and there's a lot of players and a lot of guilt to go around, including the United States consumer, including the government, including mortgage players, Wall Street. All of us were involved in this. And the run up on the housing crisis was one of the big problems. I don't worry about that core component of America. I don't worry so much about that issue right now because of the quality of the borrowers that we've been underwriting in the last 10 years. There's no liar loans, if you remember that expression. Everybody shows us their income. Everybody shows us their down payment. Appraisers are all neutral. So I think you've got a lot of quality in the housing market today, meaning the underlying borrowers are stronger than they were in the last crisis. That's going to change this dynamic. And that's why I think once we sort of ease off a little bit, hopefully we ease these monetary policies when there's all this extra money floating around, that definitely causes inflation, but we'll eat through that. Time will tell, calms down, and then we'll move forward on our businesses going forward at the next stage.
Excellent, John. I really appreciate that positive attitude. It's great to know that some of the fundamentals that caused that previous great financial crisis don't exist in the current environment. I think that can give us some hope that maybe this won't be quite as difficult. So, John, let's jump forward. I mean, you talked about monetary policy, and we know the Fed is taking steps in raising interest rates to fight inflation. So we'll kind of watch and see. I think there's going to be some expected rate increases through the rest of the year. But let's move to kind of some practical implications of all of this. So you're not only leading a very important and large bank with lots of assets, but you're an entrepreneur as well. What do businesses do when a recession hits? What are some of the moves that they take? And are those likely to have impacts on organizations that host and run events? What kind of things do companies do when economic times get tough?
Well, obviously, I'm going to state the obvious, right? You're going through and taking a look at your business projections here for the next quarter, right, immediately. And not only you're looking to make sure you've got people right sized. I think every single business, most of their operating costs are greater than 50% are going to be our people, right? It's been super hard to find people to work for us, as we all know, over the last couple of years. Where did everybody go? I'm not really sure still, but that'll ease some of that pain and some of that inflation. I actually run a school here in my local community, and you pay teachers 10% more this year than you did last year. That's where permanent inflation exists, right? So those teachers will always make that more, and then it'll grow from there. And those kind of jobs, these aren't sales jobs. So people with salaries get larger salary increases. So you put in that permanent inflation. And those are things that we just need to, as business owners, swallow and absorb into our business models. We change our pricing, et cetera. But really what you start to do now is you're starting to take more time to make more detailed decisions. When there's a lot of revenue floating around like there was in 2020 and 2021 in a lot of businesses, you make quicker decisions, but they might not have been the best decisions. During this time now, you're going through literally the tedious, the non-fun pieces of business where you're looking line by line at all your partners, all your vendors. Do I have the best contract with them. Yet at the same time, they're facing pricing pressures as well. And so they're trying to pass those on to you. So there's a lot of friction in business relationships today. There's no doubt, like even in my own company, having 45 offices and a couple thousand employees, we do a lot of travel. But what are we doing right now? We're doing a lot of these events. We're doing a lot more, events online like this, our internal communication systems, et cetera, and we're avoiding those ancillary expenses. But I'm sending a bunch of our sales executives down to a big sales conference in Dallas this weekend, right? Where they're going to be meeting with people face to face. So you're making more intelligent decisions, but they're balanced decisions. You're not going to abandon your revenue side, which you usually get from properly planned out events.
That's great. I really appreciate that perspective. And companies are going to be taking a hard look. They're going to get those magnifying glasses out, looking at every expense, looking for ways to get leaner, to cut costs that's not adding value to the business. And I want to close with you, John, on that last point that you made and get just kind of a deeper perspective on it, which, a lot of the folks in our audience, event professionals, marketing communications professionals, one of their main objectives with conferences, trade shows, and similar events is to bring buyers and sellers together, right? Or to bring stakeholders together to generate business. So what advice would you provide to organizations that host these events? How can they make a strong case about the value proposition of their event so that doesn't wind up being one of the costs that organizations cut as they're doing this fine look there? How do they make that strong case?
Right. My personal advice to you as the owner of a pretty successful business who's trying to figure out how to get it back profitable again is be thematic. And the thematic is it's one of two things. No matter what you're doing, you can weave this idea into there. To the point Steve made, how can I help you generate more revenue through this event? What are the direct lines? What are the links? Your advertising, your promotions, your email marketing that you're doing should be thematically like, how can I generate more revenue for you? Or the theme today should be, how can I help you save more money? How can I educate your team about how to figure out how to save more money? You can go many different veins off those two themes, but you will have a home run. If I got a call or an email about that and someone was going to help me actually achieve that from the seat of the CEO or any business unit owner, people are going to be all over your events. So it doesn't matter what you're selling. Talk about those two things, and then sell what you're trying to sell simultaneously to that. And it's going to be a big win.
That's fantastic, John. Great advice. Continue to demonstrate how you can help folks drive revenue and keep growing their business. And you're going to be one of the ones they're going to keep that partnership with. John Koch, CEO, chairman, and founder of the Federal Savings Bank. It's been our pleasure to have you on Planning for the Possible today. John, one final question. If folks are interested in following up with you to ask some further questions or possibly look into some mortgage financing, where can they get a hold of John Koch?
Absolutely. Hopefully you guys will put in the chat my email address. Please feel free to email me directly. It's jkoch at the Federal Savings Bank. And I'm an entrepreneur, so I return emails.
Fantastic. Wonderful. Hey, John, it's been great having you on the program. Thanks for helping us think through some of these challenges and for your advice and perspectives on how organizations should continue to push their value proposition, bring value to your partners, and they won't cut you, right? So that's a good lesson. Thanks, John. Take care. All right, folks, we've got some more great content coming up, and two of our featured speakers remaining. We're going to be introducing those in a second. And before we do that, we want to put another poll out there. So now that we have the benefit of some of John's insight on what's going on in the recession, we're curious, folks, how concerned are you about the impact of a recession on your events in 2022 or 2023? You can see the options there from I'm freaking out to not concerned at all, or maybe you're not sure, right? Maybe the verdict is still out. Love to get your responses on that. And we're actually going to hold over the results, folks, because I'd like to now bring on our two additional featured speakers here. And I'm going to begin by introducing Hillary Smith. Hillary Smith is Senior Vice President of Strategy and Creative for PRA Business Events. Hillary has a passion for and a proven track record of leading and cultivating cultures of creative thinkers. She is a multi-published, award-winning visionary who has mastered the design thinking process, a method of creative problem-solving used by mega brands such as Starbucks, Amazon, and Apple, to name just a few. Hillary spent well over a decade of experience leading strategy in the meetings and events creative space. She's a true disruptor and change agent, the ability to follow through with tactical implementations. An entrepreneur at heart, Hillary co-founded Concept Events, that's with a K, I love that, in 2008, which became a leading destination management company in North America. And she worked with many major brands as clients, McKinsey, Bank of America, P&G, Nike, and others. And in fact, Concept was named one of the Inc. 5,000 fastest growing private companies in both 2018 and 2019. So that's wonderful. Right around that time, PRA Events was smart enough to scoop up Concept Events and now is part of PRA organization. And Hillary was brought on to establish the centralized function of strategy and creative across the organization of 250 people in 29 destinations. Hillary's favorite quote, and I love this, from Steve Jobs: "Creativity is just connecting things." Welcome to the program, Hillary Smith. And hopefully you can connect some things for us in terms of things that our audience can do to keep their events thriving. Hillary, it's great to have you on the program.
Thank you so much, Steve and B-Dance. It is so exciting to be here. Really excited. Thank you for the intro.
Wonderful. And Hillary, before we bring Dan Lotsoff on to join us on the panel here, maybe just a few lines, Hillary. I'm sure there's a lot I didn't share in your bio. Tell our audience a little bit about what you do there at PRA and where you're broadcasting from today.
Absolutely. I am broadcasting from Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and primarily I lead the strategy and creative function for our team. So we've got a centralized approach to creative, and we have about 60 people within that function, experienced designers and creative designers alike. And so we manage and handle the most complex, strategic, and key client opportunities across the country and even beyond. So it's a lot of fun. We get to be right up front with our clients. And so we've pretty much had a front row seat for the last several years going through this and now rebounding and seeing what's coming in the future.
Wonderful. And full disclosure to my audience, B-Dance works closely with PRA, and we've seen that wonderful work in action on the strategy, creative, and implementation side. Wonderful organization you've got there, Hillary. And, you know, it's interesting. We just start coming out of this pandemic situation, and of course, the 1-2 punch now, we've got an economic challenge to deal with. So I can't wait to get some of your thoughts and perspectives on how do we get through this, right? But let's go ahead and bring on our other panelists so that we can get to the questions. And I know our audience is interested in participating as well. I'm thrilled to also bring on as one of our featured guests, Dan Lotsoff, who's Chief Revenue Officer and Chief of Staff for Notified, which is a leading cloud events platform. More on that in a minute. Dan's got 13 years of experience in the events industry and more than 15 years experience managing teams. Dan understands what it takes to motivate people and support them as they advance in their careers. Currently, he oversees the global sales and marketing organization for Notified, the world's only communications cloud for events, public relations, and investor relations. It's a great package. While at work, Dan is driven by speed, but fortunately, he takes time to slow down on the weekends, enjoying time with his wife, 3 kids, right? Wow. And playing a round of golf, which we know you love as well. Please welcome to the program, Dan Lotsoff. Dan, great to have you join us. Good to see you.
Thanks, Steve. Great to be here.
And Dan, of course, we've worked, full disclosure, B-Dance has worked very closely with Notified on many opportunities. Fantastic technology, fantastic teams there at Notified. Share a little bit more with our audience about your role there and what you do with Notified.
Yeah, sure. So my responsibility is really to lead our global sales and marketing organization, but that really boils down to working with our over 10,000 customers, listening to their needs and challenges, and helping to build technology platforms and services to support them, whether that be in the events, investor relations, or public relations space. And so, you know, what we are trying to do is really shape the future, which is why today's discussion is so exciting, because I think we're coming out of one period and really moving into the new norm for events. And the recession is something that I think we are going to all have to be dealing with, you know, for the next decade. Not that this recession by itself will last that long, but we know that things are cyclical and they go up and down, and events are going to be here to stay no matter what the market conditions are. So really excited for today's discussion and looking forward to chatting with you, Steve.
Fantastic. Well, Dan, it's great to have you. And where are you broadcasting from today?
I'm actually in our Chicago office, so I'm wearing these headsets just in case there's a little bit of extra noise in the background.
Well, your audio sounds great. And Chicago, one of the great American cities, great cities of the world. So let's go ahead and bring Hillary up as well and see if we can squeeze all three of us on the camera here. It looked like a CNN interview. It's great. We don't have the Chiron floating. We'll work on that later. So Dan and Hillary, first what I want to do, I want to push the poll results out, right? Because we asked our audience, how concerned are they? And let's take a look at this. So looks like about 31% very concerned. About half our audience somewhat concerned about the potential impact of a recession. We've got some real positive folks not concerned at all and a few who aren't sure. I'm glad that no one chose I'm freaking out because we certainly don't want that to be the case. But Hillary, let me open with you and with the context of those poll results. You know, a good chunk of our audience, about 80%, is very or somewhat concerned about the potential impacts of an event. And I guess, Hillary, what I'd like to open with you on is, what are you hearing from your clients as you engage with them, helping them design their event portfolios, their event strategies? What are you hearing from them in terms of their concerns about the current economic situation? And then, Dan, we'll come to you with the same question in a second.
I would say that the clients that we're speaking with within the last, I would say 60 to 90 days in particular, are starting to talk about it. Meaning that 60 to 90 days ago, it was full throttle, just continuing to focus on 2022 events and just getting everything placed and finalized for that. So I feel like there's a bit of a game of catch up, which matches what Mr. Koch was speaking about the lagging awareness. I think at this point too, we're still seeing really strong demand through the end of the year and then into Q1 and even into Q2 starting for 2023. So I think that corporations and particularly our clients are still kind of going on with business as usual and getting themselves prepared so that they do have locations and plans in place. I do think that we're starting to hear within even the last 30 days around hedging, you know, what are their plan Bs? How can they prioritize? What are those decisions going to be looking like? Not to necessarily do more with less, which I think is what we experienced in the past, but do more with the same. So I haven't seen real cuts to budgets yet. We haven't experienced any cancellations or anything like that related to this.
Good.
I think we're at like that precipice where we can start to kind of smell it and see it on everybody's minds. And so we're starting to have those conversations now, really.
Well, thank you for that assessment. And it's interesting, right, Hillary, how quickly that can turn. You noted just in the last 30 days, right, people are really starting to kind of talk about this and think about this. I'm pleased that you're not seeing any cancellations or any decrease in investment on the part of show organizers and event planners. A little bit of insight into PRA's business. You folks, of course, help organizations with both in-person experiences as well as digital or virtual experiences. You seeing any differences in either of those modalities of engagement, or are folks just kind of pushing forward and trying to be optimistic?
I think they're still pushing forward, but we're seeing more of an interest around technology and making sure technology is at the forefront of those conversations and in the plans. In the past, again, that was a big reactionary afterthought. It was this big Hail Mary at the end. And I think that planners have this opportunity today that they're seizing. They're much more comfortable talking about technology. They know the users are more comfortable talking about technology and embracing it for events. So I think for us, it's more about having different types of conversations on the front end, much more consultative, much more around different scenarios with respect to the different audiences, so that we have that agility and flexibility down the road should anything change. I think that they're really planning for and making sure that they are utilizing every one of the levers that they now have to pull in order to make sure that this becomes a very shallow experience and a short, blip on the radar screen, as we can all hope, coming into 2023.
That's right. I always do double fingers crossed too. I don't know if that cancels it out. Since I was a kid, I never knew, but I'm going to stick with the positive. Really interesting insight, Hillary. And I'm going to go to Dan in a second, but I just wanted to note, good on PRA for acquiring concept events, because clearly you're bringing that strategic thought process that I know your clients are benefiting from, and really looking at all of the options they have to engage their stakeholders. Now, Dan, just the same kind of questions. What are you guys hearing at Notified? You're obviously one of the largest providers of all kinds of event solutions. You have a great emphasis and particular capabilities in technology and digital experiences. But what are you hearing from your clients? Similar to Hillary, or are you hearing some different things about their concern level?
Yeah, no, I think it's similar. I mean, I think, those that are doing their fiscal 23 planning right now are probably a little bit ahead of others. I think the main word that we're hearing is people want optionality. Historically, when people were in the middle of COVID, everybody was thinking, okay, when we come out, we're going to be in this hybrid world. But the definition of hybrid is very important. And I think people historically thought hybrid only meant we were going to live stream all the content that was available at the in-person event to my digital audience. And that is starting to morph finally. And people are starting to understand that hybrid doesn't have to be an identical representation or replication of your in-person event. And so I think the future is going to involve a digital component because it is too risky, whether you're talking about a recession or you're talking about travel problems or you're talking about the next monkeypox or whatever next virus is that we're all going to hear about. People can't afford to be caught having to be reactive. Right now, we are in this emotional pull back to in-person events, but emotion is not a strategy. And so I think what the world is really realizing is that it's changed forever, and we all need to figure out how to plan for the future, which is de-risking our events, providing better experiences for our sponsors. And I think the other piece is that while events are getting booked further out into the future, what we're starting to see in terms of data from an attendance perspective, Skiff Meetings published something a couple of weeks ago where the attendance levels are 65% of what they were in 2019. That's dangerous when you consider that in 2020 and 2021, when everything went virtual, the numbers were actually higher than 2019 because your audience sizes were even larger. So if you're only getting 65%, remember, sure, there are events at 100%, no problem, that's great. But that means there's other events that are less than 65%. And so we need to plan for, attendance numbers to increase. And if 65%, even if that rises to 75, 80% of where they were in 2019, that's not a sustainable model for any event organization to build upon. So I think we're definitely going to see how technology shifts and changes that.
That's great, Dan. I appreciate the statistics. I mean, Hillary, it's a bit jarring, right? A 65% kind of attendance rate. I don't know how many event financial models can survive on that. And Dan, appreciate as well your note on the shifting definition of hybrid events. It's sort of similar to the shifting definition about what a recession is. Kind of interesting. But Hillary, I mean, Dan's point, I mean, it's a big point, right? In terms of audience mix, where people want to engage in events. Of course, I think as an industry, we all, we're eager to get back to in-person engagement. We all know and love that. But I'll kind of pose the question that Dan raised. Have things indelibly changed in terms of engagement coming out of this pandemic? Are virtual or digital experiences going to be here forever? And what kind of mix are we looking at as we face potential economic challenges where perhaps organizations can't spend as much in participating in events? And that might be one of the drivers of potentially these low percentages that Dan shared. What are your thoughts about that as we come out of largely this pandemic?
Sure. Well, first, I wholly agree with Dan. So on the digital comment, I think 100% digital is here to stay. It's not going anywhere. And to the point, none of us have a crystal ball. My hairdresser likes to say, if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. And so the thought behind that is true, but it's you have got to have a flexible plan that involves digital as well as in-person events. They're no longer, two separate things. It is one aligned strategy. And I think that's a good point to say. I think in the past, we were looking at events very episodically, very individually and in siloed. And now the planners who are focusing and are able to focus on proactive versus reactive planning, because many of us haven't had that opportunity, we're taking a look at our entire events portfolio and going through that exercise of examining and investigating where each one fits, and then where is that right technology to make sure we have the agility and flexibility to to have that holistic approach and have it be sound, for the coming year. The second insight that I can provide to the 65% statistic, in our experience, what I'm seeing more and more and more is this different value of time. And so we've become, all of our human behaviors have changed over the course of the pandemic. Psychology, sociology, everything that we expect to experience at an in-person event has changed. The stakes are 10 times higher now than they ever have been before. And so we're having to partner in different ways with our clients because the consumer expectations for taking their time to attend an in-person event, they better be curated and personalized, and it better have all of these things that are designed specifically for them because they have taken their time to actually fly and attend and leave the comforts of home and in their bubble with their family and in their house or whatever. And I get it. I do think, using the trailing 12 as an example, I think that statistic may shift a little bit as we drop off some of the earlier months. Yep. But for the most part, I don't see, for us, the demand continues to be through the roof for in-person, but there isn't this siloed separate conversation around digital now. It's very much woven in, and it's a singular conversation that we're having more about the portfolio of events versus just one. I think planners are much more comfortable leading their organizations in those conversations, which I think for 23 and for this recession is going to do wonders for our ability to react and respond to it, because that's we didn't have in 2008. No one was comfortable in the digital space. We had none of the technology like Notified or others. And therefore, and by the way, at that point in time, it was all about the financials. It was all about the optics, and events were a bad word. You said it, events, people, the human side of seeing each other is starved. Even in our organizations, we've been so busy operating in-person events for groups that even our own company, there's many people that we've never even met in person, and it does impact how we engage and react. So I do think that for 23, corporations are going to have to focus on the human factor for the decisions that they're making versus just the financial piece of that, which I do agree. As an entrepreneur, I totally get it. You've got to really look at every single lever that you can pull.
Well said, Hillary. And I think the focus on portfolio level planning is a really great dynamic. I love that perspective. And, look, event professionals are really busy. It takes a lot of effort to plan and put these events on. And typically you end one event, you got to start planning the next one, right? And that's a tough cycle to kind of get out of. So I think having that kind of forward-looking portfolio level approach is probably great advice. And then, Dan, Hillary talks a lot about the things that make events successful, right? Personalizing those experiences, curating the content, really being much more, personalized at a more granular level to drive much more value. We've learned a lot about how to do that since the last Great Recession, and both you and I guess we were all around during that time in 08, 09, when the financial crisis led people to be pulling out of events. Virtual events kind of got their birth. It was kind of like the coming out party for virtual events, right? And yet, as Hillary notes, because of the experience of the past 2 years, I think people are much more comfortable with technology, and it doesn't seem like it's an either or decision anymore. Either I have an in-person program or I have a virtual event. Are you seeing that as well, Dan, that people are, and you mentioned hybrid before, but how is that manifesting itself? It's not 08, 09 this time around.
Yeah. I mean, look, in 08, 09, nobody knew what to do when they had to pivot to a digital event, right? We just all spent 2 years doing it where you were forced. So every single person in the planet knows how to run a digital event at this point in time. Otherwise, your business didn't survive. Right. I think that the other thing is that we talk about hybrid. The idea is almost ridiculous at this point in time. When was the last time any of you guys registered for an event in person? It's a digital experience when you're registering. So does that make it a digital event already just because registration in the microsite's online? It's not like you go back to the convention center to watch on-demand content either, right? It's already posted somewhere. So many of these components already exist. And so I think personally the word hybrid is actually just going to disappear, and an event's going to be an event, and that's how it's going to move forward. I think the other difference is that when we've gone through these phases of digital events and it was just about broadcasting content, then it was about, okay, how do I get interaction and engagement. And we kind of went through this fake phase of it. And now it's about driving real, meaningful connections and personalization and engagement, both for the sponsor and the attendee to the attendee, the organizer and the attendee. You have to look at those different personas and those different audience tracks and map that journey out and build technology around that. Some of that might be for an executive to be in person. I think the other problem that we're all seeing is that events historically have been kind of exclusive. Okay, they haven't been the greatest diversity, equity, and inclusive type of format. And when you put them online, or you make them more accessible, or you provide optionality to your audiences, you can be more inclusive. And that's another key factor of why I think they're going to fundamentally change the format of what they've historically operated as. And I think we've all learned that you don't need to sit in sessions for 3 days in a row. You can consume that content before the event. And if you're going in person, the piece you thrive on and you ask for is the engagement, the bumping into people, the one-on-one sessions, the meetings. I can watch a 60-hour session at my home on a 70-inch TV. I don't need to be in person. In fact, I'll probably have a better viewing experience because I'm late to the session and I'm in the back of the room.
That's great, Dan. And just a pro tip for folks in the audience, please don't watch me on a 70-inch screen. It's not going to be what you're looking for, so keep it on the small box here. Great points, both of you. And you both raised some really important potential impacts, right, on different key stakeholders that event professionals have to think about. And so we've got one final poll here I'd love to push out now. Hillary and Dan, we'd love to get some insight from our audience on what potential event impacts most concern our audience, right? So we got some different choices here: lower than expected in-person attendance, decreased exhibitor or sponsorship revenue, difficulty booking desired speakers, right? I mean, it's expensive and sometimes not that enjoyable to travel anymore. Don't mean to be overly critical there, right? Having to pivot to an all virtual event, maybe all of the above. Folks, I think this is a multi-choice. You can check as many boxes as you'd like. And maybe production team, we can just go ahead and push these results out here. I'm seeing lots of concern about the revenue side, right? Decreased revenue from sponsors and exhibitors. And, you know, Hillary, I'm going to kind of bring that to you. Looks like, 75% of our audience is concerned on the revenue side. Some pretty kind of level concerns on some of the other topics here. But, uncertainty can be a real challenge in the event space, right? Because people are being asked to invest ahead, right, as a sponsor or exhibitor, or to commit to being a speaker or some other kind of participant in a program. And if there's uncertainty about whether that event is going to go off or what things might look like 3, 6, 9 months down the road, does that cause people to pull back and be less committed to an event, or maybe not commit as much budget to the event? What are you seeing in those terms? Are people a little bit slower to make those commitments given the uncertainty that we're facing?
100%. Like, that is probably one of the biggest obstacles that we face. I say already, but it's not stopping. Like, this is only going to make it worse. And so from a headwinds perspective, a piece of advice that I would urge any planner, sponsor, exhibitor, anybody, is to first and foremost align yourself with those tried and true partnerships, engage them as early as possible, and have those strategic discussions. Give them a seat at the table, but expect that the supply chain is not going to wait for you. So the unfortunate truth, as honest as I can, direct as I can be, is that we're seeing unless you're signing, no one's holding the supply for you. No one is holding the product. And therefore, for us, it's been really difficult to have the supply chain respond to these last minute, decisions, which is already happening. So I don't see that going away with the pending recession, but there are massive risks associated with that, because there isn't just a line of suppliers and products sitting around waiting for those decisions to be made last minute, which is why it's so important to engage the right partner earlier on in the process and really manage that timeline and get a real decision to make sure that you're not losing the opportunity. But I do think that there's a component of, again, starvation of trade shows and all of that that's in person, that's pent up, again, from what the absence that we've just experienced. So I do think, at least for the coming year, I don't think that that's going to go away right away. I do think budgets and spend from a sponsorship perspective will be impacted. But I don't think it's just we're going to see a desert. I don't think they're all going to be cut down. I think you're going to be much more selective about where you're spending and where you're going and who you're sending.
Excellent insight. And boy, you bring these supply chain challenges in, it gets so complex so quickly. I mean, just listening to John Koch in our first segment, right, was enough to make my brain explode. And, I can't even get my heads around global supply chains, which we know are under a lot of pressure. Here's an interesting question, actually, from the audience. I'd love to throw this out there. Hillary, I'm going to start with you. Dan, I promise we'll get to you in a second here. And the question is, during the COVID pandemic, some organizations had to rely on insurance payouts, right, for canceled physical events to be able to actually put on a virtual experience that would replace that. And I think those benefits have largely now been tapped out. But it sort of leads to a question about when an event planning organization is looking at their total budget, Hillary, how much of their budget should they think about allocating to digital experiences? And Dan, I'll come to you in a minute with the same question. And Hillary, recognizing that, to Dan's point, the modern in-person event is a digital experience in many ways, right? So it's not so cut and dried as it used to be. But as you look at kind of that top level budget, Hillary, how much would you recommend that organizations allocate to kind of traditional virtual or digital experiences as we know them?
I wish I could just give, instinctually, I go all over the place between the type of event, first and foremost. Is this something that's driving business and driving revenue? And then I have a different answer. In all honesty, this is something to where you need to engage the right people at the table. Talk about content agility. Talk about the experience that you're hoping to create with your attendees and the objectives of the meetings. I don't think that there is a right percentage, because I think as you look at a portfolio, and I hate to keep saying that, but that's really the way I think about it. There's going to be the type of event, like an incentive or a customer-facing event, where your digital spend might be less. Now, that doesn't mean technology. It's going to be less. But holistically, you might shift a bunch of that digital spend and technology spend to the next type of event, that exhibitor experience or that trade show, and that's going to, shift. That's going to be 80-20 or instead of 70-30, So I think it'll balance out overall. I wish there was a magic number, and maybe Ben can give you the magic number. But for us, we deal with so many different types of events that it's hard to answer that question definitively.
Well, I think that's fair, and I like the answer that within a portfolio you might have some very different allocations, kind of program to program, depending on the objectives. Dan, kind of same question. It's probably not a fair one, but Notified obviously supports and delivers digital and hybrid experiences. You guys support all kinds of on-site capabilities, so you guys are right in the mix with all of this. What are you seeing as your clients are putting their programs together in terms of how they're allocating funding across in-person and digital program components?
Yeah, I think like Hillary pointed out, you can't really give a percentage because at the end of the day, the definition of what is virtual and what is in person doesn't make any sense anymore. So I would probably start by saying you need to identify the goals and objectives of your event and then the audience segments and what you're trying to get out of them. If your event goals are to maximize the attendance for the top 100 executives, then invest 95% of your budget on that in-person experience to make sure that they have a great experience and provide the optionality in a different format. And in that case, I'd tell you, Notified isn't the right solution for it. Maybe there's a way to post it on YouTube for free. Okay. If your goal of your event is to drive demand generation across thousands of people, then digital is actually a better solution than in person because you can track things at a completely different level and funnel them into your CRM system and your marketing automation platforms for follow-up and execution with different levels of speed than you can at an in-person event where you're literally carrying business cards home or shipping your lead retrieval forms home. So I think, you really need to look at the audiences, the goals and objectives of the event, and then determine where to make the investments. I will tell you this. I think that what you saw during COVID was a lot of people making reactionary decisions, and in certain cases got burned by going with cheaper alternative solutions that both reflect poorly on their brand and on their execution. And so I think whether it's leveraging firms like PRA or BDance, it's really important to pick the right partners to make that technology selection for you so that you can be in a situation where you are creating brand you are creating greater brand awareness and performance and not doing damage and risk to your brand. So I would just tell you that I think it shouldn't be an afterthought. It needs to be part of the core budget process and probably greater investment than what you're actually thinking going into it.
Excellent. Wonderful perspectives from both of you. And I have to say, I love the consistency that you both take the angle of what are the business objectives? What are we trying to achieve? And therefore, what's the best strategy? And then, Dan, to your point as well, the technology choices kind of fall out of that, don't they? Right? Depending on what those objectives are. And Hillary loved the portfolio approach and really thinking strategically, not about one event in isolation from the other elements of your program, because while each may have unique objectives in their own right, collectively you're trying to achieve something with that portfolio, and those pieces need to work really well together. Hillary and Dan, unfortunately, wow, that hour just flew by. My production team just said we have to wrap up. I have an hour more worth of questions here, and I'm sure our audience does as well. So before we say thank you and close up the show, I'd love to hear from both of you, as we did with John. Hillary, we'll start with you first. I know folks in our audience will want to pick your brain on some of these strategy and creative ideas and what you're seeing and help them follow up in planning their programs. Where can folks in our audience find you, Hillary? Do you have social media? Is there a website, email address? What are your details?
Absolutely. I'm on LinkedIn, but I will go ahead and put my email address into the chat. And very much like John, I like to respond to emails, and I get really excited to help solve problems in any way that I can. That's what is really drawing me to this industry, particularly in this moment. So please feel free to reach out. And I think Dan and I we could go to work on somebody's portfolio together. Just get a whiteboard and, boardroom table, maybe some coffee. And I think he and I could really do some damage together. So I appreciate the time.
I would love to be a fly on the wall in that meeting. That would be tremendous. So Hillary, thank you. If you would put your email in the chat. And Dan, same question to you. Folks are going to want to follow up, continue to pick your brain for great strategic ideas, and maybe get a ticket to this workshop that you and Hillary are now going to be putting together. Dan, where can folks find you at Notified?
Yeah, I'd drop my email in as well, or on LinkedIn. I think, the point is we're all evolving this space, and like Hillary talked about, nobody's got a perfect crystal ball. So it's conversations like this that are instrumental to the future of this industry. Events are not going anywhere. We've all seen that in the last few years of how powerful they are. And so I think the first place is start with the question. Ask, get into a conversation. There are a lot of organizations that have popped up over the last 24 months. Those will be the first ones to leave this space, okay? The ones that have been around for the last 10, 12, 20 years, those are the ones that have seen 2008, 2009, that have seen, what it looked like before COVID. Use those to help you understand what the future looks like. And, again, it doesn't mean you have to use their platform or their services, but talk to them. I think that's the most important thing.
Fantastic. Wonderful. Well, that's it, folks. We are out of time, and I want to thank my audience for hanging a little bit with some overtime here. We appreciate your valuable time. We want to respect that, and I know we're a couple minutes over the scheduled time, but I also want to thank our fantastic guests, Hillary Smith from PRA Events, Dan Lotzoff from Notified, and of course, John Koch from the Federal Savings Bank. This has been a wonderful hour, and folks, I think we've heard some really great insights and perspectives from our featured speakers. I know I've come away feeling much more positive, much more bullish. Gas still costs a lot of money, but I know with leaders like yourselves providing great advice to event professionals that we're going to continue to see great growth in the event space and have the opportunity to participate in some fantastic experiences. So thank you again, Hillary and Dan, for being with us. Thank you to our audience for joining us here on Planning for the Possible. I'm Steve Boyce with BDance. It's been great spending this time with you. We hope you've enjoyed the program. I know I did. We hope you took away some great tips and recommendations for how to keep your events thriving during a recession. And let's hope we don't continue to have those challenges. Be safe, be well, folks. Thank you for your time, and we'll see you on the next program here at BDANCE.